In the montane lands of the dwarves, a grim tale is oft told. A story of gods and mortals, of heroes and beasts, of glory and ruin. A story of wealth and death immeasurable. These histories of avarice and toil chronicle the legend of Irolkageth, Northhold. Good evening. Tonight, we return to the dwarves of the Uncommon Ales. The fortress of Northhold has just gained access to a wealth of new precious ores, and its inhabitants are now preparing to ramp up the production of weapons and armor to supply the impending war. A group of migrants is entering the fortress at this very moment, eager to work. Some of these migrants seem like viable candidates for our militia. A militia dwarf needs to have a good head on their shoulders. They need to be hardy enough to handle the stresses of combat and the sight of gore. Those with the most psychological wherewithal are being drafted. Our militia has grown to the point of requiring a second melee squad. Kadol, the hammer dwarf who took down one of those blind cave ogres, has proven his worth and is going to lead the squad. He has named it the Mechanical Skunks. Very intimidating. These warriors may be needed immediately, as our prophet in the deep brings its own complications. The Crundle denizens of the caverns are being quite the nuisance. A few of them are starting to make their way into our cavern entrance, attacking some of our citizens, like our gem cutter Thakut here. Now, Crundles are small, unintelligent animals, between the size of a dog and a cat. They're generally too small to overpower a dwarf in combat, even an unarmed civilian, but they have a tendency to get into scuffles with dwarves. Their bites and scratches will scare and stress our dwarves, and that won't do. We'll have to send our military down to keep these things in check. The brass wars have been ordered back down to the cave, and Ox is now doing a fine job dispatching some of these creatures. All of this bisection and decapitation is making a bit of a mess, but the upside is that the Crundle corpses can be harvested for food and bones by our butchers. So all this violence is being put towards a productive purpose. A human monster hunter is requesting to join our fort, and with this Crundle situation getting a bit out of hand, I'd say we could use all the help we can get. In the wake of these subterranean incursions, I'm going to start setting up some cage traps near our entrance. Many dangerous but potentially useful creatures inhabit the caves, and if they're going to be entering our fort, I'd rather have them enter in a cage. Our library has been carved out, and we're now furnishing it. I'll go ahead and officially set these rooms as libraries. The dwarves have called the lower reading room the Palace of Gears, and the upper study area the Tin Mansion. Charming. I'm going to finally assign scrolls and toulons to that study room as scholars. Once we've made some blank parchment quires, they'll be able to start writing some books if they're so inclined. For now, the books we've brought from the humans will provide our citizens with some exotic reading material. With all these new citizens joining us, we need to start digging out more quarters, this time a level below. Our fort is growing populous enough that a vertical residential district makes more sense than expanding outward endlessly. I'm also going to dig out some bedrooms just above our tavern. We need to dig out an inn to make sure these residents stay happy and well rested. All these mercenaries and monster hunters have just been napping on the rock floor of our communal dormitories up to this point. Our strand extraction workshops are finally being built. Adamantine ore isn't quite like the ore of normal metals. Each stone needs to be processed into metal strands, which are then smelted into metallic wafers that can be worked into usable equipment. The extraction process is time-consuming. We'll eventually want people working around the clock to get as much of the stuff processed as possible. For now, our operation is still limited by our workforce. While we've certainly been expanding, many of the migrants we've been getting have been children. Over a quarter of our citizens are too young to work. And in fact, this lacking workforce is starting to have some ramifications in our fort. Our refuse heap is starting to accumulate quite a few corpses. We don't have enough hands available to dump the bodies into the trash smasher. Everyone is too busy. The sight of this troll skeleton is leading to a little unease among our dwarves. It's nothing to worry about at the moment, but we can't work these dwarves too hard, or else jobs are going to pile up like this. Nonetheless, there's a bit of landscaping work to do, and our miners aren't assigned to corpse hauling anyway. Long term, one of the most important defensive structures we want on the surface is a moat. Now, our fortress is dug into the side of a mountain, so this is going to be a little more complicated than your average moat. But the basic idea is to dig the moat around this peak of the mountain. The natural rock walls can be smoothed and carved into fortifications. This will require a fraction of the work that would be necessary to build a defensive structure of this size from artificially constructed walls. For now, I'll have our dwarves start carving out this little valley separating our chunk of rock here from the rest of the mountain. Some turkey poults have hatched. Now my dwarves are supposed to be taking all the eggs that my turkeys lay and cooking them, but it seems like with our lack of hands the job slipped through the cracks. The eggs were left in the nest box with the mother for the entire incubation period. Turkeys lay pretty large clutches, so now we've got more than 10 baby turkeys running around. We'll build a cage to keep the little guys safe and out of the way until they're grown. I hadn't planned this, and I'm not really keen on having our limited workforce spend their time trying to wrangle a bunch of baby birds into a cage, but long term this could benefit us. Once these things are grown, our egg output is going to explode, as long as we have enough hands to collect the eggs. Once these birds are grown, we can sell or slaughter any of the adults that we don't need. These turkeys could be a massive food source. Speaking of massive food sources, the dwarven caravan has arrived. They bring news of the war. The forces of the mountain home have been rapidly mobilizing, and have taken part in no less than 10 assaults on goblin territory, an extremely aggressive military strategy. They were able to seize one of the goblin dark pits, Lurch Menace. A fairly minor outpost, but it serves as a staging area for further assaults. The goblins have been put on the defensive. They haven't sent a single attack out in the year since their assault on our capital. However, our attacks have been very costly. Thus far, the war has claimed the lives of 74 goblins, but 179 of our people have died. Now, our nation is much more populous than that of the goblins, but our people have never known war before. All this death is a terrible thing. We'll need to end this war quickly. But for now, all we can do is focus on trade with the caravan. We'll make our request from the mountain home and start buying supplies. Those gold figurines we've been cranking out all year have given us very large amounts of capital to barter with. We're getting some parchment to make writing materials for our library, and the caravan has brought some books and scrolls as well. Interestingly, this scroll is actually an account of some historical events from the Goblin Nation. Well, know your enemy. It talks about a jaguar that was giving them some trouble, an elven forest retreat they were pillaging, and some story about a goblin were-armadillo. I'm not sure how insightful any of that is. Anyway, we'll buy up the usual resources: food, thread, textiles, and leather. We'll get some metal crossbow bolts, some dye, some dwarven wheat flour. Yes, this has been a pretty good haul. You might have noticed that we've been amassing a whole lot of cloth, silk, yarn, and leather from the traders these past few seasons, without putting it to much use. Well, one of those migrant waves so fortunately provided us with a clothier of legendary skill, Uvash Lightast Ulzest. Keeping a large fortress of dwarves clothed in high-quality garb requires a lot of textile imports, but it's well worth the effort. A fresh pair of finely woven dwarven trousers are a thing to behold. Putting on the masterful works of an artisan tailor provides a boost to a dwarf's happiness. Conversely, having old clothes slowly wear away into rags tends to make dwarves very distressed. Not to mention, an efficient clothes-making operation can pay for itself. The slightly worn hand-me-down socks from our fort can be traded back to the caravans for a tidy profit. Uvash is going to get started on this fashionable pursuit. Another clutch of turkey poults has hatched. This is starting to really get out of hand. These birds are running absolutely wild. But there's no time to think about that, because one of our farmers is now being attacked by another cavern monster. The attacker is a Reacher, a long-armed, unintelligent humanoid disguised to look like a corpse. Disgusting. The civilians it's been harassing seem to have given it a black eye and made their escape. The dwarves took some hits, but nothing that seems very serious. I'll send the militia down to end this thing before it hurts anyone else. And a third clutch of turkey poults has hatched. There are now nearly 40 turkey chicks running around the fortress. That's it, we are deconstructing all of the nest boxes. I don't care if we won't be able to harvest any more eggs. This situation has gotten completely out of control. The dwarves can have eggs when they've shown they can handle the responsibility that those eggs come with. I shudder to imagine being the one tasked to clean the floors after such a deluge of sheer poultry rolls over the fortress. The dwarves are now scrambling to get these things locked up, but the birds are really going everywhere. The Reacher is now dead, yet more chaos is erupting. A swarm of hungry heads are now assaulting our civilians in the caves. These flying, bat-like monsters are essentially big mouths with wings. Like most of the cavern rabble we've seen thus far, they aren't very lethal, but they could get a lucky hit in on a civilian. This time, one of our monster hunters has dealt with the creature. We've been hiring a number of them for obvious reasons, and it looks like one of them has finally started getting to work. The Hillocks of Ring Paddled have just been founded, a half-day's travel to our southwest. They look to our thriving economy for support. These new territories will elevate our lands in the eyes of the mountain home, and allow us to appoint a baron in a year's time, next autumn. The Fortress of Northhold is finally going to be put on the map. Now, at this point, I've just about had it with all these jobs not being done. Something needs to be done about all the junk that's piling up, not to mention the turkey situation. We're going to need to take some drastic action. Every single workshop is going to have all jobs suspended, and we're going to take most of our militia off training duty. All production will stop, and the entire labor force of the fortress is going to be dedicated to a massive cleaning effort. And off the dwarves go. It's quite gratifying to watch them finally getting these birds locked away. And to assist in the cleanup efforts, some migrants have arrived. We'll dig out rooms as usual and put them to work hauling with the rest of the dwarves. These new additions leave our fortress with over 90 citizens. We'll also have the small mechanical skunks squad trained down in the cavern gatehouse. They should be able to block any lesser cavern creatures that try to get into the fort, and respond to any cavern attacks on our civilians. And they may need to get to work right away, as a voracious cave crawler is attacking some folks down in the cavern now. These worm-like monsters are quite large, but as invertebrates they're fairly vulnerable to our weaponry. I'm not all too concerned, we've felled bigger foes before. That being said, there are quite a few haulers taking raw adamantine up to the surface right now. The cave crawler could probably take on these civilians. We'll send our militia to deal with it immediately. As it happens, Ox was standing somewhere nearby and has helped take down the creature. With all these great beasts we've taken down, it's hard to imagine any cavern monster being beyond our ability to deal with. Sure, some of our civilians might get wounded before our militia can respond, but what creature could stand before a warrior like Ox? A warm wind blows through the caves. The smell of smoke and death is carried in the air. Somewhere deep, the crackling of burning fungus echoes out in warning. The forgotten beast, Lumash Imust, has come. A huge blob of flame. It has 3 long hanging tails and it undulates rhythmically. Lumash Imust brings fire and desolation wherever it goes. As it incinerates its way through the twisting tunnels of the second cavern layer, all life is burned away, leaving nothing but ash. This destructive force of the deep would be extremely dangerous to try fighting. If one of our military dwarves were able to close in and strike it squarely, they would probably be able to dissipate it with a few blows from any weapon. But the extreme heat of this thing and the burning underbrush underfoot would probably kill anyone that got that close. Mark's dwarves might do the trick, but I haven't had a chance to properly train up our ranged squad yet, so I'm not confident in their ability to deal with it. For now, I'd say we're better off not fighting the creature. Lumash is in Cavern Layer 2 at the moment. Since that cavern isn't directly connected to our stairwell, this gives us some breathing room. But there are 1 or 2 passages connecting Cavern 2 to Cavern 3. Lumash might be able to make its way into the fortress through that path. Until we've come up with a definite plan for how to deal with this creature, the safe thing to do is lock up the 3rd cavern. We're evacuating everyone from the 3rd cavern now. The last dwarf to get in was injured by that voracious cave crawler, but they made it. Lumash has disappeared into unexplored parts of the cavern, but I don't see it coming through the downward passage. The 3rd cavern might end up safe after all, but we'll seal it up for now regardless. Yet more citizens of the Searing Hatchet have acknowledged our wealth and might, and have founded a hillocks nearby. These new settlements have been popping up dangerously close to some of the northern goblin dark pits. In fact, the goblins have been settling additional dark pits to the immediate southwest of Northhold recently. It seems that the foundation of our fortress has triggered some kind of land grab between the two nations. However, our fortress isn't yet ready to defend these new sites if the goblins decide to attack them. Once we've got a proper raiding party ready, we'll be able to take over or destroy these northern goblin sites and properly protect our lands. Let's hope these new settlements can hold out until then. Our cleanup crews have been hard at work, and most of the unusable body parts from our trash heap have been thrown into the trash smasher. Our Polts have been mostly caged away, where they won't be able to cause any more problems. With our cleanup efforts a success, we can resume our regular work. I'll have some of our miners get back to work digging the moat. A vile force of darkness has arrived. A raiding party of goblins is advancing on our fortress over the mountains to the west. As this is their first attack on our fort, they've sent a small force out to test our defenses. There's only 7 of them here. Our miners are still up digging at the mountain, leaving them vulnerable. They might be able to get down to the fortress before the goblins close in, but we need to get our militia dwarves positioned to be able to defend the civilians in case the goblins move in too fast. We'll order the brass wars and our marks dwarves to guard the entrance, and see how quickly the civilians and goblins move. It seems like all the civilians have evacuated back into the fortress before the goblins could find them. Excellent. We now have a choice. We can either send out our militia to strike down these invaders right away, or we could just wait out the siege. Now, a properly managed dwarven fortress is more or less self-sustaining. If we keep an eye on our stocks of food and drink and adjust our production accordingly, we should be able to hold out against these goblins indefinitely. And with winter just about to begin, there aren't even going to be any caravans coming for some months, so we have little incentive to risk fighting with them right now. At the moment, I'd say we ought to close up our gates and deal with these guys later. They can stand out there in the rain all they'd like. We've got better things to do than clean up their corpses. Sadly, the goblins are killing our livestock, such as the guard dogs we had outside. We raise our mugs to their sacrifice. The dwarves of Northhold are now besieged from above and below. They hunker down for a long winter, with death challenging them from every direction. And yet, the dwarves are in good spirits. They know nothing can reach them in their sanctuary, and cut off from what resources that might be found on the surface and in the caves. This seems as good a time as ever to hold the Festival of Arenas, belated as it might be. Work is being suspended again, the dwarves are being ordered into the tavern, and all are excited to begin the festivities. But while the dwarves hide in their little fortress, the howls of deep things still shake the walls of their home. The forgotten beast, Cagus Extut, has come. A great hairy Dimetrodon. It has thin wings of stretched skin, and it squirms and fidgets. Its light brown hair is long and shaggy. Beware its deadly dust. This enormous creature is flying around the first cavern layer, luckily sealed off from the fortress. It glides above the tops of the great cavern mushroom caps, spewing toxic particles with incredible force. It's not yet clear what effects this dust has on its victims. That dust alone might prove extremely lethal. While this creature presently poses no threat to us, being locked away in the first cavern, it might prove to represent an opportunity. Such a creature, if captured, could be a fine addition to our defenses. That dust would be as deadly to invaders as it would be to us, and if a proper housing were created, we might even be able to produce dust-infused weapons. Such endeavors would be very dangerous to set up. But the dwarves are a bold people. Capturing these beasts to work for our own benefit might prove a worthwhile endeavor. But for now, our top priority is the adamantine, which will prove the most versatile means of fighting our enemies. This will be important because a third dwarven hillocks has sprouted up south of us, which we'll eventually need to defend. Meanwhile, in the tavern, the dwarves are making merry, telling stories to each other. A Tobul Ushrir Batok is telling of how our nation's first king, Monam Anvil Cleans originally took the throne. At the same time as his coronation, King Monam was wed to Erush Dance, a monster hunter. Sadly, Urush died a mere 2 years later in a tragic attack by a giant wolf out in the wilderness when her son Zuthon was only 2 years old. But the dwarves have a new queen now, well over a century later. Iden Perfect Handles, coronated less than a year ago after the death of King Zuthon. Queen Iden is something of an enigma. We've heard a great many strange and worrying rumors about the new queen. At first, we dismissed such claims as treasonous lies, but the more we hear, the more concerning our impression of her becomes. What we do know is that she was originally a poet in one of the western hillocks of our nation. She was married and had a few children at a young age, but then she disappeared. As far as anyone can tell, she vanished off the land of granite entirely. Wild stories have been spreading that she forded her way across the Water of Stokers on a mad voyage out west in search of the mythical Shattered Continents, a landmass said to house magic and chaos. The stories tell of a vast mountain range populated by pixies and gnomes, dark jungle soiled by evil magic, and even necromancers. Such tales must be exaggerations and lies. Nonetheless, stories have been spreading that she found this magical land and took up residence with a race of goblins there. It's said that she learned their ways and values and became a part of their society. Some say she's more goblin than dwarf now. It has even been said that she's murdered 2 people in cold blood since she took up residence there. We do know for certain that she's never once set foot in the capital Whipdrinks, despite being queen. Somehow she's been sending messengers to rule our civilization from afar. If the stories are to be believed, she's ruling the Searing Hatchet from inside a goblin dark tower, under the close watch of a demon king. Now, surely such heinous tales are utter fabrication. The idea that our queen is collaborating with a goblin nation is unthinkable. And yet, we know very little for certain about Queen Iden. We'd best tread carefully. But it's been a good month, and the time for storytelling is over. The dwarves are being allowed access to the rest of the fortress, and jobs are being unsuspended. There's work to do. I've also dug out a training area for our Marks dwarves. They need a proper shooting range to increase their crossbow skills. The space is fitted out with many archery targets. Down in the caverns, I'm trying to figure out the effects of Kagus Axtut's dust. The creature is attacking some elk birds. The first stage of the disease seems to be dizziness, but Kagus Axtut seems to manage to kill any creature that gets covered in dust long before any other symptoms develop, so we don't yet know the full effects. A dwarven child has withdrawn from society and is preparing to make an artifact. This child Obok has been with us since the first migrant wave, and she's a mere 3 years old. But a dwarf struck with a strange mood is empowered by mysterious forces to produce an artifact of legendary quality, regardless of the dwarf's age. She has claimed one of the workshops we've been using for strand extraction. She's looking for stones, and it seems that because of her choice of workshop, the closest stone available is raw adamantine ore. She's using quite a lot of it, 4 boulders worth. Given our limited access to more adamantine, I'm not entirely thrilled about that, but perhaps this artifact will be worth it. Obok has created Zaludinen, a raw adamantine bracelet. This ludicrously expensive item is encrusted with rectangular adamantine cabacons, adorned with hanging rings of raw adamantine, and has an image of 4-pointed stars on it. This object is unfathomably valuable. It's hard to overstate how utterly expensive this bracelet is. It has a value of 1,200,000. It is, without a doubt, the most valuable single object in the entire world, created by a 3-year-old. Obok is a rather unique child. Despite only being 3, she has some interesting political opinions. She values peace above war at all times. In fact, she dreams of bringing peace to the world. An ambitious goal for her age. She also has an incredibly calm demeanor and values sacrifice. She seems like an odd child, wise beyond her years. Born on the brink of war after a century of peace. Perhaps this artifact somehow represents her desire to return to the peaceful days of a past she never knew. It is the 20th of Obsidian, nearing the end of the year 126. The dwarves grow restless, locked away in their fortress. With spring on the approach, the time of trading is about to begin, and having goblins hanging around outside scaring away the caravans just won't do. It's high time we broke this siege and reclaimed the surface. We also have to deal with the flaming forgotten beast issue keeping us out of the third cavern. But perhaps our two problems could solve each other. Our miners are being tasked with digging a special new tunnel. It's a lot to carve out, so it might take them a little while to get it dug. Well, this is rather unsettling. There is a corpse in our hospital, just lying in the storeroom. It belongs to a human, but I don't think this human was one of the monster hunters or soldiers we'd let join the fortress. They were probably just some visiting bard. There's no blood on them, and I'm not seeing them in the combat logs. I guess whatever they were looking for in our hospital stocks, they didn't find it. I see no reason to suspect foul play. Perhaps they died of natural causes, or maybe our vast stores of alcohol overwhelmed their feeble human liver. Unfortunately, our trash smasher is outside where the goblins are, so we'll have to figure out some other way to get this body out of sight. I'll start digging out a crypt. But that might actually not be necessary. It turns out that the siege has actually just left. I'm not sure why they would besiege us during the one season of the year where we don't get shipments from outside. Maybe they figured out what we were planning. I had intended to dig a tunnel from the surface all the way down to Cavern 2, and let Imoosh come up and unleash some Armageddon on the surface. But it looks like we're going to have to put a stopper in that plan. I'll continue work on that project in the background. The next time something threatens us from above, I would very much like to test out some of these great cavern beasts on them. Now that those goblins are gone, we can open up the surface and let everyone back up to work there. We need to clean up the corpses from the animals those invaders killed, and we'll need to start collecting some wood. We've been running low on charcoal, which was starting to slow down our metal industry. The elven caravan has come, but it looks like they haven't brought much of use. I'll buy their pittance of supplies and some of these animals. They brought a giant groundhog and a giant kestrel, but they're really just curiosities. They can't be put to much use. We'll butcher the critters and send the elves on their way. One of our human monster hunter residents apparently just became the Lord of Ardent Smile, a human hamlet to the east. He seems to be shirking his responsibilities, though. He's hanging around listening to mediocre poetry in our tavern instead of heading off to rule his own lands. But far be it from us to interfere in the politics of petty human landholders. He can stay if he wants to. A new group of migrants arrives, bringing us up to 109 dwarves. One of these dwarves, Fath Oramoltar, is an accomplished weaponsmith. This is excellent, because we now have enough adamantine wafers to actually forge something. We're going to have Fath forge an adamantine battle axe for us. And she's done. This is an exceptional adamantine battle axe. We will, of course, award this great prize to Ox, who has proven herself time and time again in combat. Word around the fortress is that Ox has recently become romantically involved with another one of our starting 7 dwarves. Ox and Doc, our chief medical dwarf, are now a couple. Just before they became involved, Doc saw the corpse of one of those blind cave ogres Ox was fighting, which had some kind of profound impact on her personality. Doc now likes a little excitement now and then. If you recall, Doc was the one who treated Ox's wounds after that big fight. Perhaps seeing a great warrior return from the battlefield after a glorious battle and treating her combat wounds was a more exciting experience than we had realized. Let's hope they find happiness together. It is now the summer of the year 127. We've forged almost all of the initial adamantine we mined into high-quality weapons, 3 axes and 3 spears. If we want any more equipment, which we certainly do, we'll need to head back to Cavern 3. Work on the moat has been put on hold for now, as we've got a more high-priority task. We want to clear these caves of forgotten beasts, so that we can safely get back down to the adamantine. To that effect, we're working on a project that will allow us to capture these beasts and direct them to wherever we want them to go. Entrances at each of the caverns will allow beasts to enter the tunnel, lured into their prisons by the prey animals we've chained up near the surface. Once a beast enters a cell, we can remotely seal it with a lever, and let them loose on the surface, if and when we want to make use of them. This exceedingly dangerous facility will be known as the Bestarium. The dwarves are excited to begin collecting horrors from the deep, to put their great power to work for our benefit. But it's getting late, and I must retire. Come find me again some other night, and hear more of the dwarves of old, and their doomed fortress.